was intended to do in the first place. And that's constitutionally what it should be doing. A good example of this is education. The federal government should not be involved in education. It's a state's issue.
Oh, man.
Get out of it. And I know some will say, oh, you don't care about the kids? Well, of course I do. Yeah. But that's a state's issue. It's not a federal issue.
Exactly. You know, I've been having education debates with people all across terrestrial radio and here on Blog Talk Radio as well, and I've been getting more and more into this education debate, and I'm actually looking forward to the next one I have coming up, because this is a guy who says homeschools are a farce. Well, I'm the product of homeschools, and I beg to differ. But you know, the whole thing is, well, I'll give you a little bit of a background on why I beg to differ. I went to public schools through the 5th grade, and then was homeschooled the rest of the way. Graduated a year early, and every year we had to take the test of basic skills along with the other public school kids in the public school classroom. And myself and my sister, who is dyslexic, both outperformed 90% of the kids in the public schools. So, you know, don't tell me homeschooling is a farce. But
and you know, that's not uncommon. That's not uncommon. And at the same time, your family still paid its taxes to support a system that it didn't use.
Yes, exactly. My father was actually working 3 jobs to make sure they could afford the homeschool curriculum and the property taxes to fund the public schools that they weren't using. It's ridiculous, and it needs to change. And the whole thing is, we've got a federal Department of Education, which, again, Article 1, Section 8, I can't find education anywhere in there, but yet the federal Department of Education draws $100 billion every single year.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be. And again, it's one of those emotional issues, because we hear these clips like the kids are our future, and you know, we have to make sure that they get their get fed at school, and states may not be able to afford it, and we have to train more scientists. We hear all these great things, and they're true to some extent, I guess, but that just because you have a need doesn't mean the federal government needs to step in and fill it. And we've gotten accustomed to that notion that if we have a problem, the federal government can solve it and should step in and resolve it. And the reality is there are very few problems the federal government can solve, other than those really that are constitutional. They can protect the streets with a police force. Well, that's not really the federal government, it's government in general. But government can do certain things, but most things government is involved in today, government can't really do well. Can't even deliver the mail effectively.
Well, yeah, and we can talk about the money that they lose on the Postal Service and Amtrak every year, but you know, and actually the Postal Service, hey, that's in Article 1, Section 8. I completely agree. You know, post offices and post roads, right there, great.
There you
can find some way to not lose billions of dollars every year. I mean, you know, there's some way to do it, I guarantee, because the private sector has done it. But anyway, you know, but getting back to education for a minute, it's funny how public education, compulsory education, was started in the first place in this country because supposedly for the reason that, you know, rural kids and poor kids didn't have access to education. So if you make it mandatory, then everybody will get an education. And yet, what is the main thing that's being debated right now in education? Is that, oh, look, the poor kids and the rural kids aren't getting a good education. Well, you set out to solve that problem 100 years ago. What happened? You know, and
well, it's similar to the war on poverty. You know, we talked about, you know, we hear back in the 60s, well, we're going to solve the poverty problem. Well, we spent all these trillions later, and we still have the same percentage in poverty. What happened? Why didn't it work? Well, maybe the answer is that the government simply can't solve that problem.
Exactly. You know, and I've made that point in these education debates as well. You know, we have people saying, well, no, the main problem with schools has nothing to do with the schools. It's, you know, 90% of the problem is out of school factors, and it's poverty. You know, there's even a guy that started up a Facebook page. It's the poverty, stupid. You know. And it's like, okay, great. What do you propose we do about it besides the $16 trillion that we've already spent in the last 45 years?
Right.
You know, and I completely agree with Lyndon Baines Johnson, by the way, with the Great Society. He said at the launch of the Great Society that Detroit would be a shining example of what the Great Society would do for America. I concur.
Well, I'd say it is, unfortunately. And but when are we going to learn these lessons? I think that's the real crux of the discussion. And this maybe right now, where our country is primed to start learning the lessons. You know, when Obama was elected, you think, well, it took Carter to get us to Reagan. Maybe it takes Obama to get us to somebody else. I don't see who that somebody else is yet. But maybe this particular situation is enough where people are going to back off and say, hey, we are spinning ourselves into oblivion. This isn't working. We need to really question those who are questioning the Tea Party and those who the real conservatives who want to put a lid on all this, and the states' writers and libertarians, and call them whatever you want. Maybe we need to give those guys a second look, because what we're doing right now is not working. I think there's a golden opportunity right now to really take this debate to the next level, because the facts are not only on our side, they're in our face.
Yes, absolutely. I completely concur. That's a great line. I'm going to steal it. But the other thing is we hear this narrative that the Tea Party won in this debt deal, and I have to kind of couch that in an analogy. We did get the most earnest and in the public debate over raising the debt ceiling that we've ever had. Okay, that's what we got out of the deal. That's what the more conservative, constitutional-minded people got out of the deal. If you want to call them Tea Party, fine. But the thing is, it's like going to the drink machine and going to buy a soda, and it's $1.25, and you're shoveling your quarters in, and you realize you've only put in 4, but the digital display says $1.25. Somebody left a quarter in there. So you get your drink, and you didn't have to shovel in all 5 quarters. That's what the Tea Party got. I wouldn't really call it a win.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think when people look back on this, if a year from now we're coming up on the election and whoever's running on the Republican side and we have all the congressional seats up, and people think back of this, especially if the economy is still sitting here at 9+% unemployment and the debt's going nowhere, and we still hear about there's no silver bullet, and all we talk about is more stimulus spending, then I think people can look back and say, well, during this whole debate, we had the Boehners and we had the Reids and we had the Pelosi's and the Obamas, but the only group that really seemed to have an alternative course of action, one that seemed to tell us the truth that maybe we didn't want to hear then but looks more valid as we look back on it, is that so-called Tea Party, the constitutionalist, liberty folks, whatever you want to call them, those who are stepping up and not just trying to do some sort of moderate tweaking of the system, but are serious about returning government and making the type of tough choices necessary to return government to the way it used to be and should be. Those guys might have been right all along. So I think it's really hard to say. I know there's a divergence of opinion now of whether the Tea Party won or lost. I think that remains to be seen. I think it depends on how the things unfold and how the argument is controlled from here on. Because especially when you consider, you look at Wall Street, and you look at how Wall Street just tanked on this news, I think that proves a point. Now, I'm hesitant to say that the stock market going up or down is a direct correlation to anything, because there's so many factors involved here. I'm not saying that. But this whole notion that investors are going to see this deal and they want certainty and they want bipartisanship and all that, that's a crock of bull. The investors looking at this, they want to see sane economics. And the same thing that bothers them about this deal is what's bothering them about Europe. And the fact is we have government spending too much. We have too many situations where we just don't have real money backing real governments. So that it's a totally different twist, and I think that was proven wrong, this idea that a deal would sort of solve our problems, and it opens up the door for the Tea Party to advance, and we'll see how that goes. So I think that the jury's still out on that one.
Right, and I think you're exactly right. It depends on how conservatives choose to frame the debate when it's seen that, hey, maybe this wasn't the best thing to do, because they passed not just one alternative but 2. The House passed the Ryan budget, and they also passed cut, cap, and balance, both of which would have kept our credit from getting downgraded. And I guess I should end this up getting your reaction to the fact that we just voted to essentially put ourselves into debt another $2.4 trillion, which means borrowing $2.4 trillion from somebody in the form of selling our bonds to them. And at the same time, the biggest credit rating agency in China just downgraded us from A+ to A.
Yeah, and that tells us, all we need to know right there. I guess if there is an upside to all this, I mean, if the facts again are on our side, and I guess we don't want to let a good crisis go to waste, to borrow a famous quote, but that might be where we are now, where we look people. I mean, there are people I know. One guy I'm thinking about in particular who's nearing retirement, and he's an Obama fan, and it's like, okay, how's your 401k doing? And what do you think about that? And you don't want to go there, but that's sort of the reality. It's like this is hitting home now. We can't just hide from it. If you're in the 40s, do you really think you're going to get your Social Security? It's going to be cut, or even your 50s. Is it going to be there when you get there? We're looking at this debt right now. Look at Greece. Look at Italy. Look at Europe. I mean, look at the riots in the street. It can happen here. Mm-hmm. We're looking at that kind of situation right now, and it's time to the fact that we're getting closer gives us an opportunity to take a lot of these middle-of-the-roaders who just give Obama a chance and all this kind of stuff and really put the facts in front of them and say, okay, this is starting to affect your pocketbook now. If you're for new taxes, fine. In fact, I think we should have a tax increase. I think we should have a tax increase on the bottom 50%. Mm-hmm. And people looking and say, oh, you're heartless. Exactly. I think everybody should pay something. Mm-hmm. Because the truth is that's where the money is. The real money is not in the top 1%. In fact, we're already getting a lot of that. The real money is through the middle, which cuts deep down into that 50. Yeah, you want a tax increase? Fine. Let's raise it for everybody. Oh, no, I didn't mean that. I meant only for the rich.
Exactly.
Hold it. If you think taxes are good, just look at the numbers. The only way we're going to get where you want to go is if you start paying a lot more taxes. And that's the reality where we are now. And I think, if anything, the argument has gotten a little bit easier, but it's time for us to step up and to the plate and have some of our Republican candidates, for that matter, step up to the plate and start making the argument and pushing forward.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, I've said before the conservative argument doesn't really fit on a bumper sticker because first you have to break down the wall of philosophistry that the progressives have been stacking up for so long, one fallacy on top of another. But while you can't fit it on a bumper sticker, you can certainly, fit it on a 3x5 card. And the fact of the matter is, as you watch government revenue go down while the unemployment rate goes up, maybe you start to realize how flawed the system of taxing income is.
Yeah, that's true. And I know shortly after the election, I was the sort of, the lone wolf out at my workplace, and I wasn't a McCain fan, but, the truth, and I didn't vote for McCain, but the truth is, I was there saying, look, here's who we elected, here's what we're likely to see, these are the problems we're going to have, and it is so tempting, to walk in and say, I told you so, but really, that's not where we want to go. We want to sit down and say, all right, guys, we're all learning here. Well, what have we learned from the last couple of years, and where does that put us next time? It's a chance to win over some people who really thought, hey, this is pretty cool, we're going to have the first African-American president, all these kinds of things, and they didn't take a close look at who they were voting for and the direction this country was going to move. And, free health care, that sounds great. They didn't think that, hey, someone's going to have to pay for it, and it'll probably be you, and the quality will likely go down. It's an opportunity for us to really engage these people in a way that we couldn't in the past, and maybe broaden the base a bit and look for a real victory next year, one that can give us the numbers we need and hopefully the presidency to get some real things done.
Right. Well, I approach that a little bit differently, in engaging the people that voted for Obama. I start off the way you did with, okay, what have we learned here? And then I end up going straight to the what has two thumbs and was right, this guy. But, but seriously.
Yeah, I just point to my blog because I have a lot of people say, well, one guy I think about in particular, he says things like, well, none of us really know what's going to happen, and this whole thing's really a crapshoot anyway. And I say, no, it's not, okay? there's a lot of uncertainty in the world, but we do know certain things about governments and taxes and things like